Welcome back, guys, to Blackout War Stories. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. I can still taste the rust in the air, like rust scraping my tongue. The night had a thickness to it, a kind of weight that pressed down on our helmets as we moved in staggered formation, rifles low, boots thudding against wet concrete. Somewhere beyond the high fences and the floodlights, the black mass of the shipyard loomed cranes, frozen mid-motion. Towers of shipping containers stacked like mausoleums, and steel warships at berth with their hulls gleaming faintly under the sickly lamps. The Houston Naval Yard, they called it. Back then, it wasn't just a place for steel and fuel. It was a graveyard waiting for a burial no one would acknowledge. Orders were simple on paper. Secure the perimeter, investigate unauthorized personnel breaching dockside warehouses. Standard patrol, they told us. Nothing unusual. But the radios hissed like they didn't want to carry our voices. And even before we stepped past the gates, a dread that no training manual could teach gnawed its way into our bones. "Stay sharp," Sergeant Maddox muttered through his clenched jaw. His voice was steady, but I could see the way his eyes darted toward the shadows moving between cranes. He wasn't telling us to stay sharp, he was telling himself. We weren't supposed to split, not in an industrial sprawl like this, but command insisted we cover ground fast. My fire team swept toward Warehouse 9. Its corrugated walls were smeared with salt and grime, and the roll-up door hung crooked, like it had been forced from inside, not out. A cold draft seeped through the gap, carrying the stench of something rotten meat left too long in the sun. We exchanged looks. None of us said the word we were all thinking. Bodies. Corporal Diaz pulled a pry bar from his kit, metal shrieking against metal as he forced the door open enough for us to slip inside. Darkness swallowed us whole, broken only by the pale sweep of our rifle-mounted lights. Dust hung thick, disturbed by footprints that didn't match Navy boots. They dragged unevenly, crossing back and forth, circling in ways that made no sense. "God damn, what is this place?" Diaz whispered. The interior looked less like a storage depot and more like a staging ground for something unsanctioned. Crates split open, their contents gutted and scattered. Machinery parts we couldn't identify, wires snaking across the concrete floor. Strange symbols spray-painted onto the walls in a language none of us recognized. And in the far corner, lit only when my beam passed over it, stood a steel container unlike the rest. No markings, no locks. Just riveted plates sealed tight, humming faintly as though a generator throbbed inside. That was when we heard it faint, hollow tapping from within. 3 knocks, then silence. "Prisoner?" Diaz asked too quickly, like he needed a human explanation, but Maddox just shook his head. "No prisoners here." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe this was some smuggling op gone wrong, some criminal syndicate tearing apart the yard's storage units. But my hands sweated against the rifle grip. The tapping hadn't sounded like fists. It sounded deliberate, measured, like a signal. Behind us, the door slammed shut on its own. The warehouse rang with the echo. My beam whipped across the walls, no one was near it. Maddox barked for us to hold positions, but his voice cracked. Diaz cursed under his breath, checking the door's chains. Locked from the outside now. Someone had sealed us in. And then came the radio static, not from our headsets, from somewhere deeper inside the warehouse. A low, garbled transmission bleeding through the air itself. Words distorted, stretched until they weren't words anymore, but something crawling along the inside of our skulls. Private Hale clapped his hands over his ears. "Jesus, make it stop!" But there was nothing to make stop. The sound wasn't filling the room, it was filling us. Like our bones had become antennas. I don't remember moving, only that suddenly I was near the steel container. My light shook against the riveted surface, and the tapping returned. Louder now, insistent. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again. Maddox grabbed my shoulder, yanking me back. His face was pale beneath the grime. "We're leaving," he growled. "Now!" But the door behind us didn't budge. And in that stillness, something inside the container whispered, not in English, not in any tongue I knew, but my mind twisted it into a shape I could almost understand. A word, a command. Open. The first mistake was hesitating. The second was listening too long. I don't know what Diaz saw in my face, but he grabbed my wrist before I could even step closer to that steel coffin. "Don't," he hissed, his knuckles white around the pry bar. His eyes begged me, not ordered me, begged. And Diaz wasn't the begging type. Then came the clang, sharp, violent, against the container wall. This time not knocking, this time pounding. Something inside was trying to get out. Maddox shoved us into a defensive line. Rifles raised, but it felt absurd. Like pointing rifles at thunder. The pounding grew erratic, metal groaning against its own seams, rivets rattling like teeth in a jar. And then abruptly it stopped. The silence after was worse. Hale, the youngest of us, whispered too loud. "It knows we're here." I swear to God I wanted to hit him just to shut him up. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. The radios on our chests flared with static again, this time synchronized, every channel hissing alive. Through the distortion came a voice, clipped, official, but buried in interference like it was traveling through oceans of distance. "Unauthorized access report, immediately containment compromised." Maddox ripped his headset off, his jaw tightening. "We're leaving. I don't care if we burn this whole place down. We're leaving." We tried the door again. Sealed. Bolted from the outside, chains pulled so tight the steel bent inward. It would take hours to cut through. Hours we didn't have. That's when Diaz noticed the hatch in the floor. A square outline hidden beneath discarded tarps and cables, flush with the concrete. He scraped the grime away and revealed a recessed handle. Not Navy issue, not standard. More like something welded in afterward, meant to be hidden. He looked up at Maddox, who only nodded once. Orders didn't matter anymore. Protocol didn't matter. Survival was the only chain of command left. The hatch groaned open to a stairwell that stank of machine oil and rot. Cold air rushed up from below, like the exhale of something buried deep. Hale refused to go first, so Maddox shoved him forward, muttering, "Move or die here." The stairwell swallowed us whole, boots echoing on rusted steel steps that descended far deeper than any storage facility had reason to go. My light cut through dust motes that spiraled like ash. The deeper we went, the worse the smell became. Not just rot now, but ozone, like scorched wiring after a lightning strike. We reached a corridor lined with pipes dripping condensation. On the walls, more symbols. Black paint, jagged, looping marks that made the air feel tighter. The paint was fresh, wet to the touch. Hale gagged, his hand pressed to his mouth. "This isn't Navy. This isn't anything." But Maddox didn't slow. He kept his rifle trained forward, shoulders hunched like a man walking into a storm. I think he knew then. Knew we weren't chasing intruders. We were walking straight into someone's secret. The corridor opened into a chamber, massive, bigger than the warehouse above, as if the shipyard had been built to conceal this place. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but the floor was a lattice of grated walkways suspended above black water that shifted with sluggish ripples. Generators hummed on distant platforms, casting dim red light across the space. And in the center, I still see it when I close my eyes, rose a structure that didn't belong. Not Navy, not human. A column of metal and stone fused together, covered in those same jagged symbols, pulsing faintly like veins beneath skin. Diaz whispered, "What the that?" No one answered. We circled closer, rifles raised, but the air itself seemed to resist. My chest tightened, breathing grew shallow. Every step felt heavier, like the closer we got, the more the structure pressed down on us. Not physically, but in our heads, like gravity bending thought itself. Then Maddox's radio clicked on again, unprompted. Not static this time. A clear voice, low, deliberate, steady as a drum. "Do not engage. Do not witness. This is a secured site. You are not authorized to observe." It wasn't command. It wasn't anyone we knew. Diaz spat on the grated floor. The structure pulsed brighter at that, almost like it had heard him. And then, from the black water below, came movement. Not splashing, not waves, but the sound of something rising. Maddox barked, "Positions! Positions!" I leaned over the grate just long enough to see pale shapes surfacing beneath us. Limbs. Too long, too thin, dragging themselves upward toward the lattice floor. Hands, if you could call them that, gripping the metal bars. Skin slick and colorless, eyes round and blind but fixed upward anyway. Hale screamed first. The grates shook with their weight as more of them climbed, water sheeting off their frames. Not soldiers, not animals. Things, crawling up like they belonged here, like the water was their barracks. Maddox fired. The crack of his rifle split the chamber, muzzle flashes illuminating a dozen faces twisted and wrong. Bursts hit home, a dark mist flecking the grates before bodies slid back into the water. But for everyone that fell back into the water, two more took its place. "Fall back!" Maddox roared. "Fall back!" We ran, boots pounding against steel, gunfire echoing like thunder in a storm drain. The creatures shrieked, high-pitched and jagged, the kind of sound that doesn't stop ringing in your ears. And over it all, the voice came again, calm as stone. "You were not meant to see this." The gunfire lit that cavern like a lightning storm. Every squeeze of the trigger gave me a strobing view of what we were up against. Wet, gray torsos twisting as they climbed. Faces like sketches of humans drawn by someone who'd never seen one. Their mouths opened too wide, edges catching the light, and the shrieking, Christ, the shrieking, cut through every thought I had left. We pulled back along the graded walkway, boots slipping in water and blood. Diaz was shouting something, maybe prayers, maybe curses. Hale's shots went wild, tracers sparking against the column that pulsed in the center of the chamber. Maddox was the only one who kept his rhythm steady, 3-round bursts, breathing like he drilled it into his soul. Even then, it wasn't enough. They just kept coming. One hauled itself up right in front of me. The beam from my rifle light landed on its face. No nose, just pits where flesh sunk in, and milky eyes that seemed to boil under the glare. It lunged, arms snapping upward. Instinct took over. I fired point blank into its chest. The recoil slammed my shoulder, hot brass scattering across my forearm, but the thing only reeled back before another round to the head dropped it into the water with a splash. Another replaced it, and another. "Move!" Maddox bellowed, shoving me ahead. We sprinted toward the far end of the chamber, where another stairwell climbed up into darkness. The whole structure groaned beneath the weight of the swarm. Every shriek echoed against steel and stone, chasing us upward until it felt like the sound itself would grab our ankles. Diaz was last man covering, firing until his mag clicked dry. I heard him curse as he slammed another in, hands shaking. Hale tripped ahead of me, his boot catching in the grate. I yanked him up before the swarm could reach. The boy's eyes were glassy, unfocused, but his legs kept moving because mine forced them. We reached the stairs. Maddox spun, unloading another burst down into the chamber. For one frozen second under the red generator lights, I saw it. That central column pulsing harder, symbols glowing like they were feeding off the chaos. Every time the swarm shrieked, the glow pulsed brighter, like it wanted this. Like we weren't fighting against them, but for it. We bolted up the stairwell 2 steps at a time. Behind us, claws scraped steel. Their bodies weren't built for stairs, but that didn't stop them from trying. The pounding of pursuit was a drumbeat I'll never forget. The stairwell opened into another corridor, tighter, walls slick with condensation, the air chokingly hot. Lights flickered overhead, weak yellow bulbs that buzzed like angry wasps. We kept running until Maddox raised his fist and forced us into silence. The swarm had stopped. I pressed against the wall, chest heaving, sweat stinging my eyes. The corridor behind us was empty, no sound except the faint hum of pipes. Diaz leaned forward, spitting bile onto the floor. "Why'd they stop?" "Why the fuck would they stop?" Hale muttered, rocking slightly on his heels. "They let us go. They let us." "Shut it!" Maddox snapped, but his voice was lower now, like he didn't want the walls to hear. I wanted to believe we'd lost them, but I couldn't shake it. The shrieks hadn't been chased off by gunfire. They'd cut out like someone had flicked a switch, like someone was controlling them. We pushed deeper into the corridor, the floor tilting upward. The heat worsened, and the smell of ozone grew so strong it burned the back of my throat. Pipes rattled as if something inside them moved. Not liquid, not steam, but something thicker. Finally, the corridor widened into a control room. Consoles lined the walls, their screens dead but still humming faintly with power. Maps, schematics, some kind of readings spilled across tables. Most were stamped with red classified banners, others marked with Navy SEALs, but none of us had clearance high enough to know what we were looking at. Maddox swept the room with his rifle before signaling us inside. "Barricade that door," he ordered. Diaz dragged a console in front of the entry while Hale collapsed into a chair, his chest heaving. I forced myself to scan the papers, even though I didn't want to. Schematics of the yard above? Yes, but also tunnels, vast underground chambers branching beneath the city. Notes scribbled in the margins, containment protocols, ritual sequences, psychological drift. One page showed a diagram of that central column we'd seen. Next to it, scrawled in heavy black ink, "Do not allow exposure to troop units." My hands trembled as I shoved the papers at Maddox. This wasn't a smuggling op. They knew about it. They built around it. Maddox's jaw clenched. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. The silence said it all. Then Hale spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "We weren't supposed to come here." The words sent a shiver through me, because they weren't his words. Not exactly. They matched the voice we'd heard on the radio. Maddox was on him in a second, shaking his shoulders. "What did you say?" Hale blinked, confusion flashing across his face. I don't know." It just came out. His eyes rolled back for a second, just a flicker. But I saw it. White, unfocused, like the things in the water. Diaz swore and raised his rifle, but Maddox shoved the barrel down. "Not yet," he growled. The room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the hum of dead machines. That's when the overhead lights flickered, then died. Total darkness swallowed us. I gripped my rifle, beam snapping on, cutting a cone of white across the room. Diaz and Maddox did the same, but Hale sat motionless in the chair, his face lit ghostly pale by our lights. Then the radios hissed again. Not interference, not command. That same voice, smooth and low, bleeding through every frequency. "You have already seen too much. None of you will leave." The words overlapped with Hale's mouth, moving in perfect sync. Diaz aimed at him again. "He's not one of us anymore." Hale's head twitched, eyes wide with terror. "Please, I don't..." The voice came out over his own, layering two tones at once. "Don't shoot me!" We froze, torn between mercy and fear. And then the consoles lit up, screens glowing green with cascading text none of us recognized, symbols streaming faster than eyes could track. The hum tangled with our radio hiss, a sick feedback that made the column pulse, like it hated its own echo. Maddox didn't wait. He slammed the butt of his rifle against Hale's temple. The boy slumped unconscious, the radio static cutting instantly. "Move!" Maddox barked. "We're finding another exit!" Now. We forced the barricade aside and plunged back into the corridor. The heat was worse. Pipes rattling violently now, dripping steam that hissed against our skin. Somewhere behind us, the hum swelled like an engine roaring to life. Diaz muttered, "This whole place is waking up." I didn't argue. The corridor split into two passages. One sloped downward, the air colder, the other climbing steep toward faint daylight, bleeding through a distant grate. Hope flared in my chest. The surface. We sprinted uphill, dragging Hale between us, our boots clanging against steel. The grate above grew brighter, sunlight cutting slivers into the dark. I tasted salt in the air. Real air. Fresh air. Then something shifted. The walls themselves seemed to contract, metal groaning inward. My ears popped from pressure. Maddox shoved us faster, but even as daylight grew closer, dread clamped harder on my chest. We reached the final ladder, vertical up to the grate. Diaz climbed first, shoving at the hatch. It didn't budge. "Locked!" he shouted, slamming his shoulder against it. "It's welded shut!" Maddox cursed and shoved Hale into my arms. He climbed up himself, firing point blank at the hinges. The ricochet screamed back down at us, sparks raining. He kicked again and again until the hatch screamed open a fraction. Light seared through, dazzling, blinding. And then a shadow fell across it. Not Navy, not creatures. Human silhouettes in combat gear, rifles aimed downward. A voice thundered through a megaphone, calm and cold. "Stand down. You are trespassing in a secured containment zone. Drop your weapons and prepare for debrief." Diaz's jaw dropped. They fucking knew. Maddox hissed at him to shut up, but it was too late. The men above weren't rescuers. They were jailers. And in that moment, with sunlight so close I could taste it, I knew we were never meant to leave that yard alive. Maddox was halfway through another kick when the hatch above stopped moving, not because of him, but because a boot pressed down from the other side, firm and deliberate, pinning it. Sunlight was a thin blade knifing between steel and shadow, and that was all we were allowed. The men up there didn't shout again. They didn't need to. Their rifles spoke with little adjustments, the soft click of safeties, the whisper of webbing. Professionals, ours but not ours. "Hands," the megaphone voice said, level as a table. "One at a time. Do not point a weapon. Hands first, then face down." Maddox stared at the gap, jaw clenched so hard I heard teeth grind. He looked down at us. Me bracing Hale, Diaz pressed to the ladder, and weighed a choice that wasn't a choice at all. He lowered his rifle and nodded once. "We go up slow. No sudden moves. No?" He didn't finish. The boot on the hatch eased, granting a few more inches. Diaz went first this time, because he was closest, because he wanted to prove something, because there was nowhere else to go. He pushed his hands through, fingers spread. A gloved arm grabbed his wrist and twisted with just enough pain to warn him. The rest of him followed, boots scraping rungs, then vanishing into the glare. We heard the dull thud of a body shoved down, a grunt cut short. Maddox shoved his rifle into my hands for a second. "Don't let Hale fall." Then he climbed. He put his hands through the slit like he was offering them to a priest. They took him faster. No ceremony now. Another thud. I dragged Hale's arm over my shoulders. He moaned, a smear of blood crusted where Maddox had cracked him. Up close, the boy looked younger than ever. The heat from the corridor was still pushing against us, like the shipyard itself was exhaling something sour. "On your feet," I whispered. "You hear me? On your feet." He nodded but didn't focus. When I lifted him, the radios on our chests buzzed with a low, almost polite tone, like a phone set to vibrate on a metal table. I killed mine without thinking. Hale's kept humming. I shoved our rifles across the ladder well, surrender by slide, and raised my hands, pushing them into the strip of daylight. Hands first, just like they said. Warm fingers, rough glove, hard twist. Up I went, eyes blinking against the sudden brightness. I came out onto concrete. Real air hit my face. Salt, oil, a whiff of grass carried in from some sad strip beyond the fence. Then the world resolved. The Houston Naval Yard spread in every direction. Cranes frozen in their long arc, container stacks as tall as buildings, the senator gray hulls of ships at berth. The yard at last, fully laid out under the high sun, as if to prove it had always been normal, always been a place for steel and seawater and schedules. The normal was a lie, a sheet thrown over a body. You could see the outline beneath if you looked too long. 5 figures in matte black gear ringed the hatch, rifles held not like threats, but like facts. No flags, no names. Faces tucked behind tinted eye shields and soft armor hoods. The megaphone sat idle now in one man's hand. He didn't need it with us 10 feet away. "Face down," he said again. "Everyone." Diaz was already prone, cheek to concrete, eyes burning holes straight through one of them. Maddox knelt, then stretched out like a swimmer, reaching for the first breath. I went down, easing Hale beside me. 2 of the black gear moved in with zip cuffs. My wrist burned as plastic bit skin. A knee pinned my shoulder. Hale whimpered. They cuffed him too, gentle in a way that made my stomach twist. "Not Navy," Diaz muttered into the floor. "Quiet," one of the helmets said. Not shouted, said. Boots arrived in greater numbers. A flatbed rolled up, its engine a low cough. Behind the ring of rifles, the yard kept moving in small ways. A crane pivoted, a forklift beeped as it reversed. Workers in distant orange vests glancing once and then away. Everyone knew how to look away. Everyone had learned. A woman approached from the shadow of a warehouse, cap low, clipboard tucked under an arm like a weapon that could sign your life off. She wore navy khaki, the insignia on her collar dull and precise. No nameplate. She didn't look at our faces, only at our positions, our weapons laid aside, the open hatch yawning like a wound. Team 4, she said to the black gear leader. Status: 4 trespassers, 1 compromised, he replied. Containment below remains stable. Breach on warehouse 9 entry. Recommend immediate reseal. The woman's eyes swept the hatch. Her nose wrinkled at the heat pouring out. Reseal, she said to someone I couldn't see. Now. Welders appeared as if conjured, masks dropping, sparks spitting. The ladder we'd climbed began closing, bright searing lines stitching steel back to steel. The sun reflected on the pool of molten metal in a way that made me think of the black water underground, how it took everything in. They hauled us up and onto the flatbed. A tarp lay there like a shroud. They didn't throw it over us, not yet. The woman climbed up after, bracing herself with a knuckle near my head. You're Marines, she said, voice clinical. Unit? Maddox stared past her. Who are you? She glanced once at him, then noted something on the clipboard. Unit, she repeated. He didn't give it. She didn't push. She gestured at the driver, and the flatbed jerked forward, weaving through the forest of containers. Welders' sparks faded behind us. The hatch disappeared beneath layered steel like a mouth swallowing its words. We drove past a line of sailors unloading drum after drum of something unlabeled. Past a security shack where a guard drank coffee with both hands, eyes on nothing. Past a sign that said visitor check-in with an arrow pointing to a small building with windows painted black from the inside. The woman finally looked straight at me. You will be processed. You will undergo medical screening. You will provide statements. You will be returned to your unit with appropriate documentation. That is the sequence. Diaz barked a laugh that came out like a cough. Appropriate documentation, he said. Like a death certificate? She didn't blink. No one is dying today. The way she said it told me that many had died on other days. We rolled into a long building with no markings. The doors opened and swallowed us. Inside, cool air, fluorescent buzz, hallways tiled in a green that belonged in a school or a prison. The flatbed stopped at a painted line. The woman tapped the side twice, and the black gear men cut our cuffs and guided us down. Follow, she said. We followed. They split us into rooms. A bolted chair, restraint rings left unused. A camera watched from a corner. The buzzy lights failed in the corners, on a rhythm that wasn't regular enough to be mechanical and wasn't irregular enough to be natural. I kept hearing the water under the grates, even though I knew it was the air conditioning. A man entered with a folder. He wore a white coat over civilian clothes. He had a face that was made to be forgotten. Hair too short, features approximate, eyes the color of old paper. He smiled like a doctor who knows you're going to lie. Sergeant, he ventured. I didn't correct him. If they wanted me a rank, I wasn't. That was their problem. He sat open the folder, laid a pen across it. He didn't introduce himself. You're safe, he said. You're in a secure facility. Whatever you encountered below is contained and will be dealt with by units trained for that purpose. Those units have names? I asked. He considered the pen. Names are for outside. And we're inside. For the moment. There was a moment of quiet that could have been mercy if any of this was kind. The pen rolled a little and stopped against his finger. Tell me what you saw, he said. I told him, the warehouse, the container, the tapping, the hatch in the floor, the chamber with the column that pulsed, the creatures rising, the voice on the radio that wasn't on the radio. He didn't write. He didn't blink often. When I got to the part about Hale speaking in 2 voices, his eyes flicked to the camera and back. Describe the symbols, he said. Wrong, I answered. They were wrong. Wrong how? They made the air thinner. He nodded as if that matched a line in a manual. And you felt pressure changes, ear popping. Yes. He folded his hands. His nails were too clean. Did anyone touch the central structure? Only with light. He nodded again. Good. The door opened and the khaki woman leaned in. We need him in medical, she said, meaning me. After, the man in the white coat replied. She didn't insist. She disappeared. He leaned closer. Listen to me. You're going to hear a story, I want you to understand it before they tell it, so you can decide whether you want to live." He said it like he was offering me a glass of water. I didn't move. "The story is that you encountered a smuggling ring. Chemicals, maybe. Explosives. You exchanged fire with criminals. You were exposed to fumes that cause hallucinations and acute stress reactions. You saw shapes that weren't there. You heard voices that were not real. Do you understand?" I stared at him until he had to blink. "That story will sound very good in a report," I said, "but it won't explain the bodies." "What bodies?" he asked gently. "The ones in the water," I said. He smiled a little. "There are no bodies in the water." "There is no water. There is a waste sump. It is drained." "You weren't there." "That's correct." "Then how do you know?" "Because I have told this story many times," he said, and something like pity crossed his face before it hid again. "And because it always works." I thought of the welders sealing the hatch like it was a coffin. I thought of the workers in orange vests looking away. I thought of how the yard kept moving while we were cuffed on the flatbed, like packages too fragile to drop and too dangerous to keep. "Why there?" I asked. "Why the yard?" He shook his head. "You already know the answer, or you wouldn't ask it that way." "I don't." "The ocean," he said simply. "You build next to the thing you cannot move." He stood then, gathering the folder, the pen snapping into the spine with a click. I said, "What happens to hail?" He paused at the door, hand on the handle. "Medical. That's not an answer. It's the only one I am allowed." He pushed the door open, leaned out, then paused again without turning back. "Do not say the wrong things in medical," he added in a soft voice. "They have a different story there." They took me to a hallway lined with doors marked by numbers instead of names. The air was colder here, humming harder. I caught a glimpse through a window. A bed, restraints neatly folded like towels at a hotel, a tray with needles capped in blue. Another room, an X-ray machine that wasn't like any I'd seen, its aperture shaped wrong, its shielding thicker than thick. They put me on a cot in a curtained space while a nurse drew blood without meeting my eyes. "Relax your fist," she said. "You'll bruise less." "What's wrong with bruises?" I asked. "They're easy to explain," she said, as if we were talking about the weather. The khaki woman appeared at the foot of the bed like she'd stepped out of the wall. "Your unit has been notified," she said. "They will collect you after processing." "What about Diaz and Maddox?" "Processing." "And Hale?" "Medical." She held my gaze one beat too long. "You will not speak of what you believe you saw. You will sign a document and you will believe it. I mean that literally. You will believe it. That is how you will survive the next months." "What if I don't?" Her face didn't change. "Then you will be reassigned somewhere quiet, somewhere where no one hears when a door closes." She pulled back the curtain. Two corpsmen wheeled Hale past on a gurney. He was awake, eyes open and too bright. His lips moved without sound, shaping syllables I recognized and didn't. The symbols from the walls turned into a prayer. One of the corpsmen noticed me watching and drew a sheet up higher over the boy's chest as if he had seen me trespassing into a private grief. "Wait," I said. Hale's eyes flicked to mine. For a second, I felt the same pressure I'd felt by the column, a subtle bending of thought around a mass too dense to name. The radios on the corpsman's chest burred faintly. One of them smacked the speaker as if it were a fly. Hale's lips stopped moving. A tiny smile shaped itself. Sad, sorry, wrong. He mouthed one word, "Open." The corpsman pushed him on. The word hung in my head like a splinter under a nail. They took me to a room with soft chairs and a table with a plant that was fake but had been dusted, which somehow made it worse. They handed me papers. The story was there in careful paragraphs. Fumes, hallucinations, criminal sabotage, boxes to initial, a space for signature. Maddox came in while I was reading, a butterfly bandage over one eyebrow, fresh white tape around his wrist. He didn't sit. He looked at the plant, then at me, then at the papers. "What did you see?" he asked softly, a question with teeth. I held up the form. "The truth," I said, and felt a laugh claw at my throat and die there. "All of it." His mouth twitched like he wanted to smile and maybe vomit. "Sign it," he said. He didn't add or else. He didn't need to. because the building said it for him. Diaz entered behind him, a fresh bruise pistoning across his cheekbone, like a thumbprint pressed hard. He flopped into the chair and snatched the pen. "You believe any of this?" he asked. "I believe we're supposed to," I said. He scrawled his name like a knife cut. "Then let's believe it." We signed. They released us back to the yard as evening came down. The light turned gold across the ships. A breeze came in off the bay, turning the stacked containers into a humming chorus. The hatch at Warehouse 9 was a smooth sheet of new steel with fresh welds and a perfect oval. An orange cone stood nearby like a joke. A junior officer met us at the gate with a clipboard, the kind that knew nothing about anything. She smiled a nervous little smile. "Looks like you boys had a day," she said. Maddox saluted without thinking. "Routine patrol, ma'am," he said. "Nothing to report." "Good," she chirped. "That's the best kind." We walked past her into the dim where our Humvee waited. No one spoke until the engine was loud enough to swallow words. The yard unspooled behind us, all cranes and cables and the low, endless clank of industry, the sort of sound that makes you think of people doing real work with their hands, not burying sins. When we were sure the air couldn't hold another secret, Diaz said, "We going back?" "To the unit," Maddox said. "I meant back down." "No," Maddox said. And for a moment I saw the man who'd turned and fired into darkness, while something with the wrong face climbed toward him. "We're going forward." "What's forward?" I asked. He stared through the windshield, watching the gate open slowly, each bar passing our faces like the tick marks in a prisoner's tally. "Whatever they don't want us to find," he said, "and whoever told us to come here in the first place." The radio on our dash crackled, just a little hiccup of sound. It was nothing, only static. It was also a promise. They sent us back to barracks like nothing had happened, like the Houston sun could bleach the day out of our uniforms. The moment our boots hit the tile, the ordinary came at us with both hands. Roll call posted on the corkboard, a notice about a charity run, a busted vending machine that ate quarters and spit out heat. A staff sergeant I didn't recognize nodded at us like we'd been off polishing brass. The normal was so loud it felt staged. Maddox didn't take us to the squad bay. He cut left into a maintenance corridor that smelled like mop water and old paint, then up a back stairwell that no one ever used. The walls here were scabbed with layers of color from decades of repairs, each coat covering up another conversation. He chose a supply closet at the landing, slid in, and we followed. It was just wide enough for the three of us to stand without bumping, our shoulders brushing brooms and a coil of hose. He closed the door and wedged a rubber stopper under it with his boot. Nobody spoke. The silence had a current in it. My mouth tasted like the grit you get after small explosions. Maddox finally said, "Check your phones." We all carried the same government-issued slab. Black, heavy, dumber than the ones civilians used, but smarter about one thing: who owned you? I thumbed it awake. The lock screen glowed with an alert I hadn't felt vibrate. New orders, unit reassigned to Coastal Infrastructure Security Detail. Routine inspections of port facilities. No deviations. The timestamp said it had been posted 3 days ago. Diaz snorted without humor. "Predated," he said. "Cute." I swiped into messages. Our squad group chat, the one we pretended wasn't monitored even though we knew it was, had been scrubbed. All yesterday's chatter about the yard, the warehouse, the weird radio interference, gone. The system left polite tombstones. Message unavailable. Over and over in a gray parade. "Gone from my side too," Diaz said, showing his screen like anyone would need proof. Maddox didn't look. He pulled a folded paper from his cargo pocket instead, yellowed like it had spent a year under a radiator. He smoothed it against a shelf. It wasn't paper. It was carbon copy, receipt stock. The top line was a coded tag, the kind you see on shipping manifests. "Where'd you get that?" I asked. "Motor pool printer," he said. "Spat out when I put in our dispatch ID this morning, like the machine forgot what it was supposed to hide." The receipt showed a chain of movement numbers. There was our unit code, there was yesterday's date, and then earlier dates too, stepping backward like footprints going into the water and not coming back out. Each line had a destination. Most were abbreviations I'd seen 100 times. Pier heads, dry dock locks, fuel terminal. One line was different. Yard 9/ALT access dash, Per South, Dawes, I said it out loud. Dawes? Diaz frowned. We don't have a Dawes. We don't, Maddox agreed, but someone does. He tapped the carbon again, near the bottom where a faint smear looked like a thumb had pressed too hard on a touchpad. Ops Auth, I said. Operations authorization. Maddox nodded. Someone gave us permission to go exactly where no one's allowed, and then someone else decided we had imagined it. The rubber stopper under the door ticked. A footstep outside. The three of us froze and breathed shallow. The steps passed, slow, then were gone. Okay, Diaz whispered when his heart fell out of his throat. We've got a name we don't have. What next? We drive back and knock at Warehouse 9? I forgot my manners yesterday while the things with soup bowl eyes tried to eat our legs. Maddox didn't smile. No hero moves, he said. We gather. Gather what? They've got their story stamped and dry. Paper floats. We sink. Maddox's stare slid to me. You're quiet. I'm thinking about the voice, I said. The one that used hail like a hand puppet and told us to stop seeing. Who does that belong to? People in black helmets or the column that made my ears ache? Which one writes the orders? Diaz rubbed his jaw where the bruise wore a purple badge. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe when they built the place, they knocked on a door and something answered. Maybe it hates company until it needs a favor. The word open crawled under my skin again. I felt for the radio on my chest, realized it was gone. They'd kept those. We'd been given new ones, still in plastic, fresh lungs. Where's Hale? I asked because the silence around his name had started to feel deliberate. Maddox exhaled through his nose. Medical ward under supply. We don't get near it without an escort and a reason that fits on a form. We could always knock, Diaz said, and then he shook his head at his own joke. No, we can't. Diaz, I said, how many times did you fire yesterday? He blinked, thrown. I don't know. 5 mags? 6? How many spare mags you carrying now? He checked his vest like I'd asked whether his heart still beat. His hand slowed. He counted. He counted again. Full load, he said, confused. Did we restock? I checked mine. Full. Fresh. Cartridges clean and identical. No heat discoloration. No dust. No memory. Maddox saw it too. Someone doesn't want us to see holes. We slipped out of the closet one at a time, like cockroaches avoiding light, and drifted down the back stairs into a building that belonged to another world, where men worried about cafeteria hours. Nobody stopped us. That was the worst part. If they'd stopped us, it would have meant they saw us. Not being seen is how you go missing. In the chow hall, forks clinked and a TV mouthed a news anchor with the volume low. A crawler talked about port inspections ramping up for homeland readiness. Stock footage of cranes and ships ran under the words, a double for yesterday in case memory needed alibi. In a corner, 2 Navy officers argued in whispers so tight they looked like they were smiling. We took a table at the back and pretended to eat. The food's heat couldn't find my insides. A corporal we didn't know sat 2 tables over, reading a laminated SOP manual like it was a Bible. On the chair across from him sat a helmet with a black hood folded beneath it, like a handshake you didn't want. Diaz stabbed his eggs, didn't bring the fork to his mouth. We need eyes that aren't theirs, he said. Who? I asked. He shrugged. Somebody, journalists like dog bones like this. You want to get a shot twice? Maddox asked, soft. Better than being erased. A sailor in dungarees hustled past with a tray. As he passed our table without turning his head, he slipped something under Diaz's napkin. He kept walking. Diaz didn't move for a beat. He lifted the napkin with 2 fingers, a key card, unmarked, scratched down the middle. Maddox's eyes cut to the sailor's back. He was gone into the stream of normal. I turned the key card over in Diaz's palm. On the back, faint with wear, were the ghosted impressions of embossed letters, rubbed nearly flat by a thumb across years. Only a few grooves remained, DAL 1B. Medical, Diaz breathed. Hall B. Maddox took it. We're not breaking in, he said, meaning we were. We went separately like smoke does, each trailing a different hallway, losing ourselves in the base's circulatory system. I took maintenance, pipes labeled with cheerful decals that said hot and cold like the truth could be mapped. Diaz took admin. Maddox took nowhere you'd notice until something broke. 10 minutes later, we found each other again at a set of double doors half hidden behind a transport cage, stacked with folded linens. The key card slid and the lock clicked like an eyelid. Inside, the color changed. White became the kind that means start over. The air smelled like antiseptic that had lost a fight with something more honest. A receptionist's desk stood empty. A printer slept with its mouth open. A sign hung over a corridor. B-Wing. Arrows pointed to imaging, neuro, isolation. We moved like we were meant to be there. Soldiers do that well. You walk like you own the place, and the place doesn't argue. Past small rooms where patients slept with machines counting their breaths. Past a man in scrubs who looked up, saw uniforms, and saw nothing else. Isolation had a window and a shade half pulled. Hale lay on the bed inside, not restrained, blanket neat. His eyes were open to the ceiling. I tapped. He didn't turn. I tapped again. The shade rose the rest of the way. He turned his head slowly, like the idea had to crawl from one ear to the other. His mouth moved, and this time sound came out, a dry scrape. "You came back." The boy's voice, only his. Diaz tried the handle. Locked. Maddox used the key card. The lock buzzed a complaint and then gave up. We slipped in and closed it behind us. Hale's eyes flooded when he saw Maddox. Not relief. Shame. "I didn't mean," he swallowed. "I don't think the words are mine." "They're not," I said. "We heard whose they were." He shook his head minutely against the pillow. "Not them. Not the ones on top. The other ones, down there. The deep ones," his breath hitched. "They like radios because radios are easy, but they like heads better." A monitor ticked, his heart slow and steady. He reached for my sleeve like a kid. His fingers were cold. "What do you remember?" Maddox asked. "The water," Hale said. "The way it moved without moving, like it was breathing. When I looked too long, it looked back." Diaz put his weight on the windowsill, scanning the hallway like a man at a bus stop not wanting to miss his ride. "We're getting you out," he said, "because sometimes a lie has to go first to see if the truth will follow." Hale smiled a little and winced at the same time. "You won't." Footsteps, soft shoes, professional timing. A woman in scrubs appeared at the window, saw 3 shapes in a room meant for one, and froze for the length of a blink. Then she moved on, choosing not to have seen. The choice became another tile in the corridor. "Who is Dawes?" I asked. Hale's face creased. The name fit him wrong in his mouth. "Doctor? Commander?" "I don't know. They said it like a password. The men with the black hoods said it softer, like it might hear." "Where?" Maddox pressed. "Sub-level," Hale murmured. "Lower than where we were. Below the water rooms, a place that's not on any map. It's colder there, but you sweat anyway." He squeezed his eyes shut. The monitor blipped faster, then settled. He whispered, "They call it the chapel." A breath. "But not because anyone prays." Diaz looked at me. "We've got a street to cross with tanks coming." I nodded. The clock in my head said we were late for everything that kept men alive. "We need hard proof," I said. "Something to put in a pocket that won't wash out." Hale's eyes flicked to the nightstand. His hand trembled toward the drawer. Maddox slid it open. Inside, a cassette tape. The kind nobody used anymore unless they wanted a thing to be difficult to destroy. A little paper strip had been stuffed under the clear plastic. B-Wing Telemetry HN Yard scrawled in a hurried hand. "How?" Diaz began. Hale smiled the wrong way again. "They still record code blue calls on analog in this wing because the new server drops when the generator kicks. They put everything on tape and then digitize it later and then burn the tapes." He swallowed. I asked the tech for a glass of water, and when he left the room, I took it. "Why?" I asked. "Because the voice speaks through speakers too," he said, as if that were a thing we all knew. "And I thought if it spoke here, someone should hear it twice." We slipped the cassette into Maddox's cargo pocket. The shape printed a rectangle against the cloth like a bruise. "Can you walk?" he asked Hale. Hale looked at his legs like they belonged to a mannequin he'd borrowed. "I can pretend," he said. We got him up slow. He swayed. Diaz took his left. I took his right. Maddox cracked the door and looked both ways like a thief who still believes doors can keep people honest. The corridor was empty. We moved. At the corner, a man in a white coat stepped out of imaging and nearly collided with us. It was the same man from the interview room, the one with the forgettable face. Recognition didn't change his features. He absorbed the scene the way a good sponge does, completely and without noise. "Back to bed," he said mildly, like we were toddlers escaped from nap. Maddox squared his shoulders. "We're clearing my Marine, Doctor." "Not your Marine," the man said, still soft. "Not today." The corridor hummed around us, a throat clearing. The lights stuttered once, twice. The air pressed thinner. Hale's grip tightened on my sleeve until the fabric cut into my arm. His lips moved. That word again. Open. I felt the idea before I heard the sound. Something on a frequency just below shame and just above prayer, sliding through the walls like a hand under a sheet. The intercom on the ceiling hissed. It wasn't turned on, it sang anyway. The man in white watched the speaker with a sadness that didn't reach his mouth. He sighed like a teacher who knows a test's been lost. "Don't do this in hallways," he told the ceiling kindly. "You scare the nurses." Then he looked at us. He wasn't smiling now. "There's a room you've not seen," he said. "The chapel." You were told. His eyes flicked to Hale. "You think you can hurt it with a tape?" He tilted his head, considering. "You can't. But you can bruise people who are trying to stand between it and everything else. Maybe that's enough for you. For me, it isn't." "Who is Dawes?" Maddox asked. The man's gaze was steady as a plumb line. "You can't get to Dawes by saying the name," he said. "You get to Dawes by not saying anything and being exactly where you're told at 3 in the morning." "I'm not good at obedience," Diaz said, teeth tight. "I know," the man said, and it took me a second to realize he meant it. Boots. Not soft shoes, now hard soles with purpose. The corridor learned a new rhythm. The man stepped back and made a little inviting motion with his hand, as if he were showing us to a table. "If you run, you prove their story," he said. "If you stay, you become mine, and that will be worse." The boots turned the corner. Black hoods, visors, facts. Maddox didn't blink. "Third option," he said. "We walk." We did. Not fast, not slow. We moved like gravity had changed and we were pretending it hadn't. The men in black filled the corridor behind us like a tide deciding whether to turn. The man in white waited between us and them, a human shrug that said not yet. The intercom shivered once and went still. We reached the lobby and kept going. The key card hummed through the lock. The door kissed open. Outside, the base was still pretending to be a place where morning formations mattered and mop water could heal. The sun was innocent on the pavement. We crossed the threshold and didn't burst into flame. At the corner, a cart rattled by piled with sheets, a white wave hiding a small hump. An orderly whistled a tune that had no notes. A cat, where had a cat come from, slipped between our feet and vanished under a stairwell. Everything had its door. We got Hale into the back seat of the Humvee under the gaze of a camera. I couldn't see but felt. That insect prickle along the neck. The keys were where we'd left them, because someone wanted us to have them. The engine turned over. The radio was quiet, a mouth closed. We drove. Past the chow hall, past the motor pool, past a chain-link fence where a plastic bag fluttered like a trapped white bird. At the gate, the MP glanced at our stickers and our faces and waved us through because that was the story today. Outside, the road bent away from the bay and into town, where people were eating lunches and forgetting things on purpose. Maddox kept both hands on the wheel like a man driving between storms. Diaz twisted in his seat to watch the rear view. Hale stared at the window and watched the world fail to end. "What now?" I asked. Maddox didn't answer. He made a right turn no one told him to make. We started seeing warehouses that weren't ours, doors with padlocks thick enough to anchor ships, a church whose sign said, "All welcome" in letters a hurricane couldn't have moved. "We don't go back to the barracks," he said finally. "We don't go back to the yard." We disappear sideways. We find a room with walls that can't hear. We play the tape. We decide if we're going to be the kind of men who open doors or the kind who keep them shut. "And if they find us before that?" Diaz asked. "They already have," I said, because sometimes the truth keeps you from tripping on hope. Hale's reflection in the glass turned to me, his mouth not moving, his eyes saying 1,000 things at once. Among them, one word, written under all the others like a signature. "Open." We ditched the base like a bad dream and slid into the city's noise, the kind that hides you if you let it. We traded uniforms for hoodies from a thrift store that smelled like someone else's rain. Maddox paid cash, exact bills, eyes never leaving their reflections in the front window. Diaz cut his hair in a gas station bathroom with a clipper that buzzed like a hornet. I watched the door and held Hale's arm when he listed to the side, steadying him like a brother you hadn't earned. We found a room above a bait shop near the channel, the kind of weekly rental that came with a crooked crucifix over the bed and a TV that only showed storms. The old man at the desk slid the key to Maddox and never asked names. He had the eyes of someone who knew all the places the water could hide a thing. Inside, we locked the door, then moved a dresser in front of it for the ceremony of feeling safe. The salt and oil smell of the port seeped through the thin window. You could hear the freight horns far off, calling to each other like whales that had forgotten they were boats. The cassette went onto the table between us, small and black, ordinary enough to be ignored by anyone who didn't know what it had eaten. Hale sat on the bed and stared at the crucifix the way a man stares at his own shadow. Diaz found a yellowed portable tape player in a shoebox of dead remotes and batteries on the dresser, blessed the hoarders, and cracked the back. By some mercy, 2 AA batteries still held a pulse. Maddox didn't sit. He stood against the wall like a guard dog that couldn't sleep. "Play it," he said. Diaz clicked the lid closed and pressed the button. The machine swallowed, whirred, and coughed up a thin hiss. For a moment, there was nothing but room tone. The soft, steady beep of a telemetry heart, wheels squeaking, a nurse saying, "Hold pressure," far away. And then, like a fish rising to a surface it had made, another layer slid under it, a low revolt of sound. It wasn't a voice at first, more like gravity with an opinion. Then the opinion chose words. "Patient exhibits no baseline stable, do not witness, not authorized." The hospital voice and the other voice braided, a double helix of denial and command. The second didn't come from the recorder. It came from whatever had been in the room when the recorder ran, the way a smell clings to a coat. A soft thud, like a door had been shut against a storm. Footsteps. The tape squealed, and the sound melted into a smear of tones that made my stomach turn like I had been spun around. Hale flinched hard, hands covering his ears. "It knows you're listening," he said through his fingers. "Let it," Diaz muttered, jaw set. The tone shifted again, resolving into something almost like coordinates. Numbers spoken under breath, some missing, some repeated, all wrong in the right way. Then deeper than the first layer, something like a choir that had forgotten music hummed the symbols we'd seen painted on the walls. Not the shapes, but the feeling of them. I tasted metal the way you taste fear before the nose knows. Maddox leaned forward just enough that the light cut his face into war lines. "Pause," he said. Diaz stopped the tape. The room breathed again. "What is it telling us?" I asked, though part of me didn't want an answer. Hale lowered his hands. He looked thinner in the motel light, as if the hospital had taken inches off him out of spite. "It's telling us we're late," he said. "It's telling us there's a door that doesn't stay shut without someone leaning on it from our side." Diaz rewound a few seconds and hit play. This time we caught a whisper buried under the beeps. A human voice pressed into the noise like a fingerprint. "Chapel, sub 2, 0300, Dawes, don't..." The rest smeared under a burst of static that sounded like a scream sped up until it was polite. We stared at each other. The motel bulb hummed. Outside, a truck downshifted, and the whole building answered. 3 in the morning, Maddox said almost to himself, remembering the man in white. "Be exactly where you're told at 3 in the morning." Diaz scratched the back of his neck until it reddened. "It's bait." "Yes," Maddox said, "but bait works both ways." I looked at Hale. He was staring at the tape player like it might grow teeth. "Can you make it?" I asked. "If we need you to stay, you stay. If we need you to run, you run." He smiled without humor. "I'll do what you tell me, Sergeant," he said, and the sarcasm in the rank hurt more than I expected. We laid out what we had like gear, a tape with coordinates that smelled like lies, a name, Dawes, that had been said in rooms where mouths didn't move, a time, a place we could guess, the chapel, sub 2. Warehouse 9 had taken us down one level. The chapel lived under that. You could cut the city into slices and it still wouldn't show you the marrow. Maddox spread a free tourist map on the table and marked the yard, the pier heads, the access roads. He marked where we had parked the first time, where the flatbed had driven, where the long, unmarked building had swallowed us. He used a pen from the bait shop, the ink skipping on the glossy paper. "No way in the same way twice," he said. "They sealed our hole and welded a smile on it. We need a different mouth." Diaz tapped the edge of the map where the channel curled like a lazy arm. "Watergate," he said. "Everything that lives under the yard is married to the water." "Boats?" I said. He grinned, quick and mean. "Not boats. Friend with a skiff owes me 2 favors and a scar." He pulled out his phone and then put it away like it had burned him. "Not on this," he said, remembering we had learned something. "Pay phone." Harbor bar. Maddox shook his head. "No phones. We use our feet. Or we use nothing at all." The room felt smaller, the walls leaning just enough to make me notice. The crucifix watched without judgment. The tape sat on the table like a black hole with corners. "Why do they call it a chapel?" I asked, because the word kept scraping my tongue. Hale didn't look up. "Because someone keeps praying there," he said softly, "and sometimes it answers." We waited out the long afternoon like soldiers do, cleaning gear you don't have, counting seconds, checking lines you've already checked. Diaz slept sitting up, head against the window, breath fogging a circle that kept vanishing. I tried to nap and dreamed of the water breathing under the grates. A slow intake, a slower release, the whole yard rising and falling on its chest. Every time I woke, the same thought sat on my chest. This is bigger than us, and that's why they picked us. At dusk, the bait shop closed downstairs. The old man dragged a sign inside that read, "Night crawlers" in chip paint. The city lights came on in slow sections, as if someone were painting them. Maddox cracked the curtain and watched the street change. "We move at midnight," he said. 2 hours to the yard. We go dark along the channel. We don't touch radios. We don't touch luck." "Chapel at 3, Diaz said, like a man repeating orders he hates so he can carry them. Hale stood up and tested his legs like a baby deer. "If it talks to me," he said, "don't listen." "We'll listen to you," I said. He gave me a look that said, "That's not what I meant," and let it pass. We left at 11:30, leaving cash on the dresser for decency's sake. The old man wasn't at the desk. A television somewhere downstairs played a baseball game from last season. The night air hit my face like water. We kept to the alleys. The port hummed under its breath. Far off, a foghorn told a story to nobody who mattered. Diaz led us along the channel on a footpath used by men who carry buckets and secrets. He knew the turns that hadn't been paved, the holes in fences that hadn't been fixed, because if they fixed them, they'd have to admit they were there. We fixed our eyes on the kind of dark that's honest. Behind us, the city pretended it was just a city. At a bend where the path ran behind an abandoned cannery, Diaz muttered, "Wait," and slipped into a shadow that was too flat. He came back dragging a dewy tarp. Under it, a skiff, more patch than skin, a little outboard motor that looked like it had been built from parts of other ideas. He patted the hull. "Favor number 3, he said. "We'll owe him whiskey and cash and a story we won't tell." We pushed off quiet, the motor coughing once because it had pride, then falling into a putter that made barely a seam. The channel cradled us toward the yard's underbelly. On our right, the industrial shore rose in angles and cranes. On our left, the open water wore the moon like a badge you could drown under. Hale sat low, eyes closed, hands on his knees. He breathed like a man counting. I watched his lips for the shape of the wrong word. He kept them still. Maddox sat at the bow, eyes measuring distances like they were problems he could solve. We slipped under a bridge and the air changed. It smelled colder. Pipes ran along the underside like veins. At a shadowed cutout in the seawall, Diaz steered us into a pocket of night. A great rose where the water met concrete. A newer weld scarred the metal around it. Someone had fixed something badly. Diaz killed the motor. The skiff rocked. We drifted to almost touching. I reached out and found purchase on a seam where the weld had skipped. The grate whined as if it wanted to remember being a door. Maddox pulled a small pry bar from his backpack, like a magician producing a rabbit with meaner teeth. He worked it into the seam, shoulders tight. The metal gave a fraction, complaining. Diaz got his hands under the bottom lip and breathed through his nose until the grate lifted enough for a man to slide under if he turned sideways and didn't mind rust in his ribs. I went first. The channel kissed my shoulder. The dark inside tasted like metal and old prayers. For a second, my head said, "Don't so loud it sounded like a voice." I slid anyway. Inside was a culvert that didn't belong on any map, sloped and slick, leading to a platform of poured concrete that caught my knees. The sound changed again, turning from the open hush of the water to the close whisper of underground. I crouched and helped Hale through, then Diaz, then Maddox. We lowered the grate back into its seat until it looked like it had never moved. We stood and breathed. The concrete wept a slow, greasy condensation. Far ahead, a square of red light that pulsed like a heartbeat and then didn't. The symbols weren't on the walls here, but the pressure of them was. I rubbed my ear and it popped. Hale winced, same time. Maddox whispered, "Timer check." 0150, Diaz said, squinting at a watch that didn't need satellites. We moved toward the red light. Our footsteps sounded like other people following us. The corridor opened into a chamber, smaller than the one with the column, but built from the same lie. Navy concrete wrapped around a thing it couldn't own. In the center stood a door that didn't look like a door until you saw the outline and couldn't unsee it. It was smooth and dark, and it hated being looked at. On either side, cameras watched with dead eyes. Above, a sign had been bolted to good government steel, Chapel. The letters were simple. The air around them was not. I swallowed and tasted coin. Hale shivered. The red light blinked once, slow, like a breath drawn for a word you don't say, and then stayed on as if the room had decided we were guests. Maddox didn't touch anything. He stood square to the door and spoke as if it could hear through concrete. "Dawes," he said, "we're here." It's 3 a.m. The chapel's door stood before us, a slab of black that seemed to drink the light, its edges pulsing with a dull glow, like a heartbeat we couldn't ignore. Maddox set his stance, shoulders squared, and for the first time since this began, his voice had no bark, no order, only finality. "This is it. Whatever's behind that door ends here." Diaz swallowed, hand twitching near his weapon. "And if it doesn't, then we make it end," Maddox replied. The door opened without touch, soundless, like a pupil dilating. Cold air rushed out, sharp with salt and iron. Inside, the chapel was not stone and wood, but steel and shadow. Ribs of machinery arched overhead, like the bones of something buried wrong. At the center rose the column again, taller, rawer, its symbols burning brighter than before. And standing beside it, half lit by the glow, was Dawes. He wasn't in uniform. He wore no insignia, no mask, just a face pale from too many nights underground. His voice carried without effort, steady, calm, as though he were speaking in a church where silence obeys. "You shouldn't have come back. You were meant to forget." Maddox stepped forward. "Then you should have chosen different Marines." Dawes looked at Hale, who shook in my grip, whispering that word again. "Open, open, open." Dawes tilted his head, almost gentle. "He hears them. He belongs to them now. Leave him and you can walk out alive." "No," I said, surprising myself. My voice cracked but didn't fall. "We leave together." Dawes sighed like a teacher disappointed in a stubborn student. He touched the column and the room groaned. The water below the grate stirred, shapes rising again, eyes wide, hands clawing. Maddox raised his rifle. "Enough," he barked. "This ends now." Dawes shook his head. "You can't kill what isn't flesh. You can't bury what was here before ships, before cities. You can only feed it, and you already have." Then Hale broke free from my grip, stumbling forward, voice no longer his, but layered with something vast and hollow. "Open!" The column shuddered. The creatures screamed below. Maddox didn't hesitate. He grabbed the tape recorder from his pocket, jammed the play button down. The room filled with that warped telemetry. The symbols chanted back at themselves. The voice of the thing inside forced into an echo. The column buckled against its own echo, lights strobing wild. Dawes roared, finally human, finally afraid. "Stop! You'll tear it loose!" But it was too late. The feedback built, the chant against chant, until the walls themselves began to crack. The creatures shrieked, clawing at their heads, folding back into the water. Hale dropped to his knees, clutching his skull, his own voice cutting through. "Shut it! Shut it now!" Maddox hurled the tape into the column. It sank into the glowing surface, and the light inverted, blinding white flooding the chamber, burning away every symbol. The hum died, the water stilled, the door slammed shut behind us. When my vision cleared, the column was gone. Only twisted steel remained, scorched and lifeless. Dawes lay crumpled on the floor, chest rising once, then never again. Hale lay still too, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face as if he'd finally been freed. None of us spoke. Maddox dragged us toward the exit. Diaz kept glancing back like he expected it to breathe again, but it didn't. It was over. We emerged into night air, the Houston Yard spread out silent and ordinary. Cranes frozen, ships waiting. For the first time since we'd stepped into Warehouse 9, the air didn't taste of blood or rust. At the gate, Maddox stopped. He looked at us, the two left, and said, "We never speak of this. Not to command, not to anyone. They'll try to twist it, erase it. But we know. We were here, and it's finished." Diaz spat, shoulders shaking. "So we walk away like nothing happened?" Maddox's eyes hardened. "No. We walk away knowing it did and knowing it won't again." The yard behind us hummed with its endless, normal industry. But the thing beneath it, the thing that whispered through radios, through blood, through dreams, was gone. And for the first time, silence felt like victory.